Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Life Forces Podcast. I am your host, Bianca, and today I'm really excited to talk to you about Body Alchemy, which is something I came up with that's a combination of different things that I really like personally, but also really like sharing with my clients. Also, if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm sitting on the couch. I thought I'd switch things up a little. That's kind of what Body Alchemy is all about, honoring your needs, your personal rhythms, how your flow is going through life, and not trying to conform to the way that you're supposed to be doing things or the way that other people do things. I'm recording this on the Libra solar eclipse, so October 2nd. I don't know how you all have been feeling, especially since the lunar eclipse in Pisces on September 17th, but there's been a lot going on, hasn't there? I'm sure for you personally, I'm sure amongst the people you know, but then also collectively, there's a lot happening, some of which is very devastating. And I just want to encourage you to keep sticking to what feels right for you and to keep choosing love instead of hate and division. For me personally, I've definitely been shedding a lot. I've been going through a big period of change and transition, and I'm definitely going to be talking about that on the next episode of the podcast, which I'm super excited about. Not necessarily like exactly what I'm going through, but more so how to navigate periods of transition, because in a lot of ways life is always changing, but there are those times where it feels like, wow, there's a lot of shifts happening and I need to stay grounded, right? So I've been shedding a lot. I really do feel, especially like around the lunar eclipse in Pisces, because it's hitting a different part of my chart and it's actually hitting my first house, which is very personal. I definitely feel myself stepping into this like new level. And when I reflect on this year, I've really grown so much. I don't have as much hangups about certain things that I used to, especially when it comes to things like money. And as a result, my financial situation has got a lot better now that it's not this thing that I'm so anxious about all the time, and more about this thing that I'm trusting a lot more. And it's very interesting because the eclipses on the Aries Libra axis are hitting my second and eighth houses. The second house is very much about like personal finances and values, and the eighth house is more about collective resources, inheritance, things that we share with other people. So the emphasis for me has been on the second house. That's where Aries is for me. So moving towards this independent way of creating wealth for myself and not being ashamed of it and being okay with doing it my own way. So that's a little side note. And I wrote about this eclipse in my newsletter. And if you haven't signed up already, I highly, highly recommend it. It's the best way to stay connected that's not dependent on the whims of the Instagram or whatever other algorithm. And I often have special offers for my subscribers. You'll hear about things before. I can go more into depth in terms of like how much I write or what I write about on my newsletter. So I'd love for you to join me there. And I'm also reminding you that October is your last chance to work with me one-on-one for a while, because I'm taking my extended break into the spring. We can explore your astrology, whether that's your natal chart, transits, or even your relationship with someone else. I love doing relationship readings. Fascinating. We can look at your human design. We can also look at your body alchemy together, which is the topic of today's episode. The links are in the show notes for newsletter sign up and also to book a session with me. As always, if you've got any questions, you can DM me on Instagram at Life Forces Inc. or via email. My email is bianca@lifeforcesinc.com. So let's get into the topic du jour, which is body alchemy. Kind of starting off point here for me is reflecting on the fact that in a lot of ways, the world is so rational and focused on intellect and communication that we tend to neglect our physical being. For me personally, everything changed once I stopped taking my body for granted, because I definitely used to. And I think this is a normal thing because for the most part, when we're young, when we're teenagers, even into our early 20s, our health is usually usually pretty under control. Our bodies are usually working pretty well. A lot of times it's the last thing we're thinking of, at least like that's what it was for me for a very long time. We often take for granted our bodies and our physicality until it's too late, right? Until a health thing comes up, until our mental health goes haywire out of the blue. But our physicality is what makes us human. Because if we had no body or physicality, we would just be souls floating around, which would be really cool, I'm sure, but also an entirely different experience. And because we have these bodies, these physical vessels, we're able to experience pleasure, pain, everything in between in such a visceral way. It's what makes us human, right? Otherwise, we would just be trees or floating in the sky somehow. The reality of contemporary life is so much of it's mental, or there's a bigger aspect on that aspect of ourselves. And I'm just thinking of things like social media, the way we connect via text. It's often very detached from our bodies. Like even if we're taking photos, even if we're posting a little TikTok, yes, our body might be involved, but there's a detachment there. And then the way other people are experiencing us is like through a mental perceptual level and less physical, let's say, right? Saying all that, I also don't want to put out there that we completely ignore our physicality. We obviously don't, because I would argue most of us care what we look like or are made to care, and I don't think that's a bad thing, but often it's very surface level, right? I think a lot of the time we're spending more time on the outside, on the surface, what's my face looking like? What's my hair looking like? Are my clothes in check? Is my body this way or that way? It's all very like surface image, whatever, as opposed to what's going on the inside. And I even mean on a really basic physical level. I don't just mean emotionally. And I think in a lot of ways, we're getting better at discussing emotions and being okay with that aspect of ourselves. But it's really all linked, right? The inside and outside and everything in between, all parts of us. And I know for me, the more I focused on the inside of myself in a physical way, in terms of my health and doing my best to understand what's really, really going on, instead of just defaulting to medication or other things that I perceive to be as more of a band-aid and not really getting to the root cause. Like that's one thing I'm super big on and have become super big on, is getting to the root of certain things, right? Whether it's a pattern that you have, maybe the root of that is some trauma you've experienced and not fully processed, or you have a certain health problem, or even like a mental health diagnosis. Doctors have just told you, take this pill, whatever. But like, let's get to the root cause. Why is that happening in your body, right? Because it doesn't need to. I've just been really big on understanding what's really going on at the root of things physically for myself, but also in an emotional, spiritual way. And the more I focused on this, the more that has shifted positively on the outside, whether it's being in a body that looks and feels vibrant, feels younger than it did when I was in my 20s, not really having acne anymore, and just experiencing life on a completely different level than I did even a few years ago. I've seen the cause and effect. I've experienced it, right? Reflecting and going back a little, I really tried to eat healthy more and more when I was younger, like throughout university, but it wasn't until my mid to late 20s when things really clicked. And this was a time where I was called to go to the root of things, right? I've talked about this before when I had some mental health stuff come up again in 2018 when, I guess I would have been 27 if my math is correct. That's when there was something in me that's just like, you need to go to the root of this. And so Ayurveda really helped me with that, because I was made to realize that my body was completely out of balance. In a lot of ways, I maybe seemed healthy. To be honest, looking back, I don't think I looked very healthy. And when I think of how I experienced my days, there wasn't a huge feeling of health, but I was quote unquote like doing the right things. I was generally eating pretty well and I was exercising. Especially for women, there's a lot of like nuance with that, especially because we're very cyclical beings in terms of our menstrual cycle. We kind of got to do different things at different times of the month, but we're going to speak about that later. But anyway, thanks to Ayurveda, I felt after a few months of integrating certain suggestions, I felt so balanced physically and mentally, like I never ever had before. I had clarity that I never had before. And I also felt more connected to this idea of spirituality. Like I kind of began to understand why people might have that kind of perspective on the world. I could feel that I was more connected to something greater than myself. And I think that's possible once the body is feeling good and once like the mechanism of the body is kind of like back on track, right? Then we can truly understand the miracle of life, or just how we're just one small part of the universe, right? This aspect, all of this kind of like health stuff, but also like living with different rhythms in life that I'm going to really dig into. This aspect was the missing piece for me in explaining the work that I do with clients, because astrology and human design, in a lot of ways, it can be very heady, very cerebral. You know, it's like we're reading about these things. How much do we actually integrate? How much do we actually embody it, right? I think human design can be a little less so, because, you know, the chart itself is like a torso. We're talking about energy centers. It can feel more of a bodily kind of modality. I really want to speak to the part of my work that's more physical and embodied. So hence body alchemy, which is a term I didn't come up with. It's a term that Jocelyn Kelly Reed, who is a great coach and mentor, suggested to me when I couldn't think of a way to sum this all up, because I was kind of explaining to her like life rhythms and how your body is and stuff like that. How would I describe body alchemy? It's basically this idea of living and flowing with the rhythms of life. So on a more macro level, and also our own personal natural rhythms on a micro level, as opposed to going against them. Because unfortunately, with the way that we live our lives, with the structure of different institutions and of work, a lot of times we're kind of going against them, or we're not doing ourselves any favors with the way our schedules are, or the way like life is set up. Body alchemy is honestly a superpower. You'll hear a lot of people in the personal development space, particularly men, speaking about like biohacking and 5 a.m. alarms they're setting every morning, these like lengthy, crazy morning routines. Maybe there's like cold plunge and stuff involved. And there's nothing inherently wrong with any of those things. But body alchemy to me is a different perspective on all that, because I find a lot of what the Robin Sharma and the Tony Robbins of the world are preaching to be very rigid. Discipline is of course important, and that's something I've learned for sure, and that's like a lifetime learning for me as someone with the North Node in Capricorn and Saturn in the 12th house and all this stuff. Anyway, so discipline's important for sure. We're not gonna deny that. But when there's no consideration for people's different rhythms, different ways of doing things, especially us women who are operating on a whole different cycle, you know, there's like the menstrual cycle, for example, the way these things are presented can feel suffocating. At least like it kind of did to me once I woke up, let's say, in some ways, because, you know, all these books are really good and interesting and have a lot of value in them. But a lot of these routines that are being advocated for, in my opinion, can negatively impact people on a physical, psychological, and spiritual level. It's all about finding what's right for you personally, because waking up at 5 a.m. might be the worst thing for you, or it might be the most amazing thing for you. We just don't know. But I think it's a little crazy to just say that like everyone should get up at 5 a.m. and that's how you're successful. That's a lot. I don't know about that. So the vast majority of my clients are women, and usually as women, we need to be less in this like masculine structured way of doing things. I'm not saying we completely throw that out the window, because those aspects of life and of flowing through it are very, very important. We do need structure. But the thing is, I would say most of us are like way more in our masculine, no matter what gender we are. A lot of us, women or not, need to embrace the spaciousness, flow, and creativity of femininity. We can have that in balance, and so that we can experience that part of life, because that part brings the creativity, the flow, the spontaneity, the juiciness, really. So I want to talk about different aspects of body alchemy as I see it. So the different kind of rhythms that we're working with here. And I encourage you to really think about, are these things you already implement into your life? Are they things that you kind of ignore? And if any of them pique your interest, note them down and see if there's something that you can follow more or go with that kind of flow of energy more. One kind of rhythm that the natural world has is seasons. For the most part, we're experiencing 4 seasons a year. And, in some places they might not be as distinct, but probably for most of us listening to this, we have fairly distinct seasons in the year. These are separated by solstices and equinoxes, right? They initiate different seasons, which have not only different weather, but also different qualities of time. Winter is usually colder than summer, but we also have longer or shorter daylight hours, right? And that also impacts how we experience time and therefore how we flow through life, right? Winter, for animals especially, is more hibernation mode, not necessarily being out there in the world, whereas summer is often the opposite for people, where they're out and about, more active. I live somewhere where a lot of people are working seasonally, so like working a lot in the summer and maybe not at all in the winter, right? Summer is usually a more active time of year, and there's lots of reasons for that, right? And then, related to weathery seasons that we have each year are the astrological seasons. And what's really interesting is the cardinal signs, which are Cancer, Capricorn, Aries, and Libra, all fall on either solstices or equinoxes. They have the quality of this initiating energy, which is very much in line with the start of the seasons, right? Also, each astrological season, doesn't matter which one, will illuminate a different area of your chart, a different house of your chart, and therefore a different area of your life. So it's interesting to look at, okay, right now we're in Libra season. For me, that's my 8th house. So for some people, Libra season might be really social and wanting to look at art and stuff. And it's not that I wouldn't want to do those things, but Libra rules my 8th house, which is all about deep healing and shared resources and transformation. It's a little more of an intense energy, right? It's a little more of an intense aspect of life, let's say. On the Mercury Cazimi in Libra we had on Monday, I was super emotional. Like, I was very, very emotional. I didn't expect it. And I kind of expect that I might experience this solar eclipse in Libra later today as being quite emotional and healing and revelatory. Then, like, going with that, like, fast forwarding to Sagittarius season, for me is all about career, since my midheaven / 10th house is in Sag. So it's also really cool to know that. And that's something I did for my clients this year that did a 2024 visioning session with me. I mapped out exactly like, okay, from this date to this date, this is a good area to focus on in your life because that's where the sun is based on the astrological season and stuff like that. It's been very interesting for me to see how all of that kind of correlates. And I feel like things generally work better, come to fruition better when I'm more aligned with, first of all, what's the season just in a really basic sense? And then what is the astrological season and what area of my life is it impacting? So another thing is the menstrual cycle. So for those ladies that menstruate, we have 4 different phases, right? 4 different stages that we're experiencing throughout a given month. That's a lot, right? Men don't have it the same way. If their hormones are, all good and there's nothing else going on, they can almost experience every day the same, but it's not like that for us. And I really wish I knew this earlier. I truly do. In terms of the menstrual cycle, we've got the menstruation phase, follicular phase, ovulatory, and luteal. We have different nutritional and movement needs during each of those phases. We also have a best kind of use of energy for each of those phases. And again, I don't know if you were taught this when you were younger or even early in your life. This is something I just learned in the past year or so. I used to always do high impact workouts, and there's a time and a place for them. And that time and the place is not, your luteal or menstrual phase, for example. And especially like how you go through your luteal phase, which is the end of your cycle, will impact your following cycle, maybe even the ones after. Because if you're doing like crazy cardio or like HIIT workouts or whatever, your cycle will really suffer. It's a time where you're meant to slow down. It's actually referred to as like an inner autumn. After summer, we're slowing down a little bit. Maybe we're going back to school or going back to work, but we're preparing for winter, right? We're not like full on summer party craziness. It's also a time in your luteal phase where, you know, you've got to eat a little bit more. You've got to like prepare for your hibernation or semi-hibernation of your menstrual phase. If you really tune into it, you might not be as social, and that's okay, right? Honor that, like let that be okay, because come your ovulatory phase, you'll probably be ready to talk to anyone and really put yourself out there. It's interesting how we can map out like each part of the menstrual phase as like a mini season, you know, like the menstrual phase is the inner winter. Then we have inner spring, summer, fall, etc., based on all four of them. The lunar cycle is kind of similar to the menstrual cycle in a lot of ways. It also has 4 parts. We start with the new moon, which is kind of like menstruation time, or you can kind of map it that way. And then we have the first quarter moon, which can be like the follicular phase, you know, like things are getting going, we're gaining energy and momentum, etc. And then we have the peak of the full moon, which is very much like an ovulation phase. You know, it's like we're at the highest energy. There's the most stuff going on. The vibes can be a little crazy sometimes, you know. We go back to the last quarter and then finally to a new moon again, right? So we have that cycle with the 4 parts as well. So it's really interesting. Even if you don't menstruate, I encourage you to pay attention to what phase of the lunar cycle we're at and how you feel at different points, right? There's a reason we have the term lunacy, right? Crazy stuff happens around a full moon a lot of the time. A lot of people feel more high energy around full moons. That's totally normal. So then another rhythm that we have going on as human animals is the circadian rhythm, which is, you know, a 24-hour natural oscillation that repeats day after day. You know, over the course of 24 hours, we're likely both asleep and awake, active and inactive, and maybe we have the same or similar wake up, go to bed times, you know, for the most part, especially on weekdays or whatever, right? So we have that quicker 24-hour cycle as opposed to like a whole month, no matter what gender you are. If your sleep schedule is a little whack, or if in general you want to feel more back on track, one of the easiest ways to regulate your circadian rhythm is to go for a walk as soon as you can in the morning, ideally within an hour of waking, to get sunlight in your eyes to signal to your body that it's daytime and it's time to be alert. We get up in the morning, especially if you work from home, maybe you don't even leave the house in the morning at all. Like it's really possible, right? But it's really important to get that sunlight in your eyes. Like don't look directly at the sun, but you know what I mean? To get that natural signal and get all of those natural processes flowing. And you can even do the same around sunset. Watch the sunset. Who doesn't love that? This will signal to your body that bedtime is approaching. Okay, maybe you don't want to go to bed at like 3 or 4 p.m., you know, like some of those German sunset times. I remember German dusk, especially if you have a tough time falling asleep. Observe the sunset, observe it getting dark, and then also be really mindful of blue light after the sun sets. I have this program that's free to download called Flux or Flux that makes your laptop more like red lighty, less blue light. It can naturally do it based on like the time zone that you put you're in. I also usually after it gets dark just have like candles going, and I also have like a red light little clippy lamp that I use for kind of a bedside lamp, and then also like if I'm reading at night, that's what I use. Especially no overhead lighting after the sun sets, in my humble opinion, if you really want to optimize your circadian rhythm. In human design, there's 2 digestion types. They both have like very different ways of operating within this like circadian rhythm. So there's like indirect and direct light. So if you have indirect light as your digestion, you digest things, whether it's food or information, actually better like out of the sun or later in the day, maybe even at night. So I know people with indirect light digestion who can eat a big dinner at 10 o'clock or whatever and go to bed and they're fine, or they work late and they're fine. But then someone with direct light, they work best during the day. Their brain is really flowing when the sun is still out. It's good for them to eat their meals outside when they can. That's really interesting, like how human design shows us our differences and our idiosyncrasies, again, because not everyone is necessarily meant to get up as the sun rises and go to bed shortly after the sun sets, right? We have different ways of doing things that are totally fine. I'm more of a morning person, but that doesn't mean that someone who likes to sleep until noon can't be successful. You know, I know tons of people like that and that works for them. And I also want to talk about like this general idea of, you know, more like chaos and spontaneity versus order and finding our own balance between that. Because I feel like people can go from one extreme to the other, or they're just so used to one that they like can't integrate the other into themselves. So for me, for some reason, when I was a child, I was obsessed with being organized, with setting schedules for myself, doing things like minute by minute. Like it was crazy. Like I was 7, maybe even younger, and writing like, I get up at 7. I have breakfast from 7:03 to craziness, right? That didn't really leave much spontaneity for me as a child sometimes. We gotta find a balance between both, right? We can't just have spontaneity and flow with absolutely zero structure, because in my opinion, you know, creativity and divine inspiration and all that, it does need a container. Like we are the container, we are the vessel, but we need to be open and prepared for it. And so for some people, for example, if you're a writer, intending to write at the same time each day, showing up the same time each day, like that can really help that flow come into your vessel, right? I don't think we should ever go from one extreme to another. I think we need to find our balance between both. We don't want to be like so hyper organized and scheduled that we like never have a fun, spontaneous moment, or we never have space for like random creative thoughts to come through. But then at the same time, we can't just be like floating through space, being trapped in outer space like those poor astronauts that I think are still somewhere out there. I hope they get rescued soon. You know, we need a tether. We need things to tether to. That can be like little routines and rituals. That can be like, maybe I don't really plan my morning, but I always have lunch at 1 or whatever it is, right? Finding our own balance. Another thing that's interesting is, for example, in the profile in human design, which is kind of like your personality according to human design, you have 2 different numbers and those energies are different, right? There's 2 parts of you. You have a couple different needs, right? That can be very, very different. For me, I'm a 2-4, which is like contradiction central, because the 2 is the hermit, but the 4 is the opportunist that wants to be social, right? So I really need this mix of alone, hermit time, doing my own thing, don't bother me, and then also socializing, being with my people and finding my people. I can't just have one or the other. It's not going to work for me. I need to find my own balance, my own commingling, my own flow in that way. And so really, to me, what Body Alchemy is all about is finding your own flow. It's about getting to this idea of productivity or just like optimal functioning, but not in this like strict, oppressive, like biohackery, ultra scheduled way, but just figuring out what works best for you, figuring out what tools you like. Do you love writing things down on paper? Like, does Google Calendar or iCal work well for you? Do you like tools like Notion? Do you like something else? Whatever it is, whatever helps you remember your intentions or your goals and actually like move towards them, that doesn't feel like you're putting yourself in jail. You have to find that out for yourself. It's something I love helping people with. So it's really about trial and error. It's about figuring things out, you know, on the subject of like morning routines or whatever. In 2020 during lockdown, I had a crazy long morning routine at some point that was great for a while. And then I got totally sick of it. And that is normal. And then now I've gotten to the point where like, there's just a few things that I prioritize in the morning, and that's that. And that's what works for me. Sometimes I journal, sometimes I don't, for example, right? We've got to allow ourselves to evolve and allow ourselves to find what works, what makes us feel alive, what makes us feel really good, what can get us into that like really focused mode when we need to be. Body Alchemy to me is its separate thing, but I also incorporate astrology and human design. For example, when it comes to astrology, we can look at our moon sign. Our moon sign is what nurtures us and what our needs are. And knowing that is so important. Me with a moon in Virgo, I like things to be organized in my own way. I like to make sure that I eat really healthy and that I have like some kind of semblance of routine or like things that I like to do to stay grounded, right? And then we have our Mars sign, which is how we naturally take action or what can help us take action. Super important as well. And then with human design, I mean, there's so much in human design that can help us in Body Alchemy, but you know, the basics are what's your energy type, what's your strategy, which is how you're meant to respond to life, and then what's your authority, what's the thing that you consult to make decisions. For example, if you're a reflector, you need time to come to conclusions about things. You're quite a shapeshifter. So having a strict routine is likely not going to work for you as a reflector. One day you do want the routine, one day you don't, and that's completely fine. So my loves, I encourage you to take whatever served you from this episode and maybe implement one idea, one thought, one little tip, whatever sparked an interest in you. Don't overwhelm yourself. This is not about doing everything at once, taking every single tip and trying to squish it inside of yourself, right? We are all about steady growth and change, and growth and change that feels good. I mean, sometimes it's a little hard to form new habits and stuff like that, but it doesn't have to feel bad. It doesn't have to feel restrictive. You know, we want to feel like we're flowing in a nice way with life. Less can really be more. As I said, I don't have a complicated morning routine. I don't think you have to have one either to be a successful person. I don't think you have to have the most updated, color-coded, whatever, precise Google calendar in order to be successful. It's so easy to overwhelm yourself and your brain and your everything with all the information that's out there. So really, I encourage you to just take what feels good and resonates and just leave the rest and see what that does for you. Thank you everyone so much for listening. Thank you. Thank you. If you love this episode, please write a review. Please share it on your Instagram stories. You can tag me at Life Forces Inc. Share it with someone who you think would love the episode. And I just really appreciate all of you so much. And I encourage you to find your flow in your own way. If you're especially interested in Body Alchemy and figuring this out for yourself and me helping you figure that out for yourself, you can book a session with me, a Body Alchemy session specifically. More info, link, etc. in the show notes. Love you guys. Thank you.